Project Literacy Boost is a story reading kindergarten program, one-on-one with volunteers, that we implemented in order to intervene with students who had not been read to in the preschool years. It comes from our concern to try to make up for the lack of lap reading in preschool. A review of the early intervention research suggests that we can do that. I was especially encouraged by the results of Project Story Boost, which was a one-on-one volunteer 2 times a week shared reading experience with kindergarten children referred by their teachers because they did not have the kind of experiences being read to in their preschool years. Overall, 100 children were referred for the project, but because there were only enough volunteers to serve 50, there was a natural control of 50 children. And when the researchers followed up 2 grades later in 2nd grade, it was very clear that the Project Story Boost children were rated by their teachers much more achieving at grade level and doing well in reading. So based on that, I developed a variation of Project Story Boost using volunteers, pre-service elementary teachers, and community volunteers to increase the oral language of at-risk kindergarten children. Asked kindergarten teachers in the community to identify children with low receptive or expressive language, those who had not been read to in preschool, or those who had poor listening skills. And after recruiting volunteers, of course my undergraduate students were ready volunteers since it was a part of their class, we began to assemble the materials needed for the project. The first stage was to assemble story bags. We put together easy, middling, and advanced book bags. And the easy bags were 6 books, 3 narrative and 3 expository, that were mostly pictures with just a few words or labels. The middling bags had some storyline. There was 1 or 2 sentences per page. A narrative example might be Mrs. Wishy-Washy. And the advanced story bag had fully developed stories such as Curious George. The next step was to train the tutors and then implement the project for 1 semester using tutor child readings 2 times a week in their kindergarten environment. The training consisted only of 1 session, an hour and a half. I began the session with background on preschool literacy development and the role of lap reading in helping children move from listening to reading, using a PowerPoint Emerging Literacy. That PowerPoint is now a YouTube video at the site that you see here. One of the things I stressed was that in reading to a child, the reader should be spending about 60 to 70% of the time in conversation about the book, not just straight reading the story from beginning to end. Also spent time on what kinds of questions to ask, and an especially important feature was to scaffold, which is to provide the answer to every single question that a child does not respond to. So, for example, if the reader asked, "What do you think the duck's going to do?" and the child did not respond, the reader scaffolded by saying, "Well, I think the duck is going to." There was a daily report sheet, a reflection sheet that could be used to tally the questions asked, the children's responses, and their attentiveness. This also served to cue the reader on what kinds of questions to ask. In talking about the kinds of questions the reader asks and the scaffolds for them, in general they fall into these categories of labeling items or elaborating on items, labeling or elaborating on events, answering motive or cause questions, evaluating or reacting to the story, or making relations to the real world, like what's that like, or have you ever. Notice that the last three are fairly high-level questions and really came near the end of the project as the readers were working with their children. I also talked about how a reader uses these questions and comments. Some of them are direct questions like, what's that? Or what's the duck going to do? Some of them are comments. Ooh, that duck looks scared. Sometimes you can use incomplete phrases like, he's going to. And of course, asking open-ended questions like, what do you think will happen next? After I had gone through the PowerPoint that showed the development of lap reading and examples of scaffolding through the preschool years, I had the tutors listen for reader questions, child responses, and reader scaffolds, and 2 very short videos. They used the narrative report form to record the questions and responses that the reader and the child were making. This is what the narrative book report form looks like. The name of the book was listed at the top. Oh, and by the way, there were 3 books in each bag. A child might choose the same book every week for 2, 3, or 4 weeks. That was the child's prerogative. So the name of the book was listed, and then just a checklist of whether the child was attentive or distracted. Then as the reader asked different questions, he or she just tallied the kind of question and whether the child had responded or whether the reader needed to provide the scaffolding for the answer. At the end, the child was asked to retell the story, and again there's a checklist of what kinds of level of retelling the child engaged in. So this is a video of Lucas with his great-granny reading Everybody Poops. Listen for the reader questions and comments and his responses.
Granny's got out here.
What?
A rabbit, and it poops all over. I got rabbit poop all over out there. Others do it in a special place. This is where Lucas goes. You go in there?
Yeah, the bathroom.
Grown-ups poop, children poop too. Well, some children poop on the potty. Others poop in their diapers.
Babies.
Babies. Oh, yuck. Look at that.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you... Now you read to Grandma.
No, you read.
I can't read that. My eyes hurt.
Read.
We don't want any trouble, do we?
Read?
Like nice boys. Would you like me?
Some animals poop and pay no attention. Others clean up after themselves. Who cleans up after themselves?
This.
What is that?
Poop.
So what is that? What is that animal?
Okay, that minute was up. That's all that camera would take at that time. Continuing with the same story, everyone poops.
Can I do the elephant?
Go with the elephant.
Oh, an elephant makes a big poop. A mouse makes a tiny poop. Yuck. A one-hump camel makes a one-hump poop. And a two-hump camel makes a two-hump poop. Oh boy. Only kidding. So what comes next? Fish poop.
You're gonna drink this here, you're gonna take it home and rub it on your chest.
Look at that. And so do birds. And bugs. Bugs poop too.
On the window.
On the window. Different animals make different kinds of poop. Different shapes, different colors, even different smells.
Notice how intrigued Lucas is with his granny saying the word poop and the interaction between them. That is as important as the actual reading that's occurring. So that essentially it was the training given to volunteers and pre-service teachers before they started to work with their chosen child. Using this format, they kept track of how many different questions they had heard in the training videos and how Lucas had responded. This shows the format used to report on an expository book. Again, the book chosen, there's usually give a prior knowledge question to see whether he or she has some information about the particular subject of the book, and again, the child's attention. The types of questions, as you notice, are different, and how the child responded or needed scaffolding. That basically is the sum and substance of Project Literacy Boost. Over a period of a semester, it was obvious from talking to the teachers, from talking to the volunteers, from looking at these completed worksheets that children were responding as members of a listening community. It was clear from this project that both the children and the future teachers benefited from Project Literacy Boost. The exciting thing about this is it's a project that's really very easy to implement, and it can use community volunteers or high school service learning students as well as university students. If you'd like more information about this and other aspects of working with children at risk of dyslexia, or those who have already failed in reading and writing, visit my website. If you go to St. Mary's ITA website, you will see the way in which we use a phonetic alphabet to remediate dyslexia in children from kindergarten through college.